All right, this is the follow up. And we are following up on a live video I did in April of 2020. My guest on the follow up is the great Chris Fenwick today. Chris, thank you so much for being available and
It's my
welcome to the
pleasure.
follow up.
It's good to see you, George.
Same here. Awesome. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the preparation that went into the show Fun Home that we both did. Chris was the MD and conductor on that show, and I was the bass player. In the video from April 2020, I already talked about the variety of instruments that I used and all of that and the technicalities that were associated with that. And I also talked to a good in a good amount to the difficulties with the show when it came to stylistic varieties, because the music was kind of all over the place, not in a bad way. That was just how it was written. So I thought that Chris would be a great conversation partner about this topic, because he had a very specific and very unique perspective on how the music came together and what we did night after night. So maybe, Chris, a good idea would kind of be to tell the audience a little bit of your background, and then kind of what was your introduction to the project, to Fun Home.
Sure. Well, I'm a music director and conductor, as George said. I do mostly new work, so mostly new musicals, not exclusively. I work a lot off Broadway and a lot on Broadway. Fun Home had life both off and on Broadway. And about, I don't know, I would guess it was probably 7 or 8 years before we started working on Fun Home.
Hmm.
I worked with Janine Tesori, the composer, on a production of Mother Courage
All right.
that Meryl Streep was in the park, and I was the conductor of that.
Mm.
And had an amazing time working with her. I just felt like, I had met a sort of artistic soulmate.
Yeah.
Um, and then I went off and did some other projects, and she went off and did some other projects, and we would sort of see each other over the years. And then, 6 or 7 or 8 years later, she got in touch with me and wanted to know if I would be interested in working on this new piece, which became Fun Home.
Mm.
Um, and so we went to Sundance Institute, which is in Utah,
Yeah.
for 3 weeks, and super off the grid,
Yeah.
like developed the piece. And at that point, a lot of the music hadn't been sort of written down. It was all sort of ruminating in Janine's head, or had yet to be written.
Hmm.
And the piece was in, George, that the piece was in a state of flux
Yeah. Yeah.
until we
Yeah.
opened on Broadway. I mean, it was a piece that we worked on for a lot of years.
Oh yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah.
but so we went to the mountains for 3 weeks, and Janine wrote a lot. Janine and Lisa Crone, who wrote the lyrics and book, wrote a lot
Hmm.
when we were at Sundance. And at the end of that process, we had a sort of first stab at the thing,
Yeah.
and then there were productions at the Public Theater and then on Broadway to follow. But
Right. Right.
that's sort of a bit about my background. I grew up loving the theater. I
Right.
studied classical piano,
Right.
and always wanted to be a conductor in the theater. I have no idea why,
That's
but
awesome.
I
Yeah.
saw somebody do it once and said, "That's it,"
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, that's sort of how what my background is and how it
How?
sort of led to Fun Home.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's very cool. I mean, it's the couple things that are already quite profound in this, and that is that, on the one hand, you always wanted to be a conductor. That's
Yeah.
that in and of itself is so specific.
It
Like,
was so specific. And
you
even in
know,
college, I was studying classical piano, and just like, you're just like, I really wanted to get my chops up as a pianist.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it was this weird thing where, like, I was working hard on this thing, and also knowing that I wasn't going to end up doing
right,
that. Like, it was
right.
going to be in service of this other thing. And
Yeah, 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 yeah,
I
yeah.
also grew up loving plays. I grew up in Minneapolis, and it's an
Okay,
amazing theater city.
right.
And so, I mean, Fun Home is really like the closest I've ever gotten in my life to working on something where my sort of like interest in, like, plays and classical theater, and my
Yeah.
interest in music, sort of combined to make this
Mm.
piece of musical theater that
Yeah.
felt it was like really worthy, in both worlds.
Oh yeah, oh
Um,
yeah, most
yeah.
definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that definitely that was noticeable, and it was also noticeable, at least to me, that there was sort of a kinship between Tesori and yourself. Between Janine
Mhm.
Tesori, Lisa Krohn, and yourself. It always seemed like there were like three heads to one body, so to speak.
Mhm.
And that was definitely noticeable that there was the creative team is on the same wavelength.
Yeah, yeah,
And that definitely also helped in bringing the music to life, because once again, like, the music was, I always thought that it came very much out of the 70s, but
mm,
then there was also a very strong musical theater component in it.
yeah,
There was a very strong, like, 21st century chamber music component in it.
absolutely.
um, and to kind of bring all of these seemingly different influences together,
Hmm.
it needed sort of the three heads with one mind,
Yeah. Well, and we were all, it's a tricky piece because it,
Yeah,
it jumps back and forth in time.
yeah,
It jumps back and forth in the way that music, sort of tells the story and illuminates the characters'
yeah,
inner lives
yeah.
and outer lives.
Oh yeah,
It,
oh
it
yeah, yeah,
also, so it really did need us and the director, Sam Gold,
oh
and
yeah,
really like a lot of members of the team to really be, you know, in a unified place where it was like we were all working towards the same thing, which was
yeah,
bringing this thing to the stage in the sort of purest, form possible.
yeah.
And so it really did require that we were all sort of heads on one body.
Oh yeah,
I
oh
also
yeah,
felt, I mean, when I went to Utah and heard what had been written thus far of the score of Fun Home,
yeah,
I really felt just like a totally deep and uncomplicated kinship with it. I just
yeah,
felt like, oh, I can see what this wants to be.
yeah, yeah,
So we
yeah, yeah.
all just like we're going towards that light,
Yeah,
to.
yeah, it all makes sense. It all, like, the various parts and bits and
Oh
pieces, they
yeah,
all make sense. That's yeah, that would be the definition of kinship. I mean,
yeah,
definitely. All right, so let's let's get into that a little bit. What are, or what were specific, because again, we're talking about this perspective on Fun Home that's not my own, right?
hmm,
And one thing that you had, like, you had to be the MD, right? You had to have, like, the overall view. I
hmm,
was in my little corner,
hmm,
dealing with the basses and muting and unmuting and whatnot.
yeah,
You had to have an overall view, right? And
yeah,
on top of that, as is the job for an MD, you have to deal with the actors, you have to
yeah,
deal with their singing, you have to deal with stage direction, all of that stuff.
yeah,
What were the difficulties for you, that sort of came up? And I fully understand that that's a difficult question to
yeah,
answer, because there's a lot, but
yeah. No, I
what
mean, doing the show, I mean, I don't know if you felt something similar, but for me, like once we had built the show, all of us together,
hmm
um, doing it was incredibly pleasurable. I
yeah,
found like it just, it was like an amazing machine
yeah,
that was so full and that ran so well.
yeah,
Um, and getting there, it was funny, like on Fun Home, everything that was a challenge was also a joy. Like it,
right,
getting there and like figuring out we went through so many rewrites all the
right,
time. We went through rewrite after rewrite at the Public Theater and opened and got great reviews. And it was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and it was
mhm,
transferring to Broadway. And we still were doing changes
right, right,
when we got ready to do it on Broadway. So, that it's challenging. I mean, at the Public Theater, there were huge rewrites that went in
oh wow,
day of the show. And so
mm.
they would get orchestrated quickly, or there were moments, I don't know if you remember, where I would just play something on the piano because it was written that day and
Yeah,
had,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but we
yeah,
wanted to see if an audience was interested. And
yeah,
the team of Fun Home was the most fearless group of people. It was
Mm.
my kind of people, because it was people who were not afraid of an
Yeah.
audience, and who
Yeah.
were not afraid if something didn't work, and then you learned something from it and then did something different the next night.
Yeah.
So, it was a challenge to sort of keep up. It's like, as a music director, you're sort of in this place on a new musical where, when you're in previews in your first production,
Mm.
changes come in from the writers. You
Mm.
have to rehearse them with actors. You have to
Right.
make sure that you're going to be able to do them that night. You have to all decide if the orchestra, if it, can it get orchestrated, or is it going to be, piano only?
Right.
If there are changes, how does it get, I have to communicate that to the orchestra
Right.
in a way that, sometimes it's notes typed out on music stands,
Yeah.
and there can be a lot of them. In Fun Home, there were a lot of them every
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
You have to make sure that it's clear what you're doing, because you can't go over everything. You can't rehearse stuff.
Right.
So you have to, like, 805 rolls along, and you just sort of cross your fingers and say, I hope I explained this okay. That's challenging. But, running the show, I mean, we had actors come in and out. You have sub
Yeah.
musicians come in and out. It is a show. It was a show. It is a show
Yeah.
that is that I, as a music director, just really, I was just very aware of each, the most minute details every single night, like the tiniest little eighth note, or the tiniest little minor second on an eighth note that goes away as soon as you hear it.
Yeah.
Like, I was so I was so aware of all those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, really honoring that. And I love, when subs come in. So, like, having musicians in and out and actors in and out, and making sure that we're all paying attention to the piece
Yeah.
in the way that that piece really demanded,
Yeah.
was a challenge. But
Yeah.
I mean, and also a joy, because I loved it. And every, I'm not a hands-off person, but I'm not a nitpicker.
Right.
So, I really like to build something so that it's solid, and
Right.
so that it can just run. And then if
Right.
there's, like, a different violinist, and they're bringing their own thing to this piece,
Right.
to me, that's so wonderful. So it's
Right.
like, you're constantly just managing, okay, this actor's playing this part. Okay, we have this person on cello. Oh, we have this, all
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
these little elements. And for me, the most challenging thing of Fun Home was making sure that it stayed Fun Home, that it stayed incredibly true to itself.
Right.
And that we could incorporate, sort of different personnel, or different ideas, or
Right.
different choices. And because no actor is the same in a role as another actor, and no musician is the same in a chair as another musician.
Exactly.
That's the most glorious thing.
Yeah. Yeah. There aren't carbon copies. I mean, these
No.
are human beings.
Yeah.
So,
I don't want people coming in and sort of like, just sort of, I mean, Fun Home was a show that had a lot of life in it.
Yeah.
And it was emotionally very rich. And
Yeah.
you had to really go on like a 90-minute ride
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
way through. And it was fairly relentless, even when it was just like the most delicate underscoring of, like, an English horn and some other instrument. It had to be full,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
expected that it was full all the time.
Yeah.
But I didn't expect that it would be exactly the same all the time. So a big challenge of a show like that, it was also a very soft show. It was also a very, it was really well built, but it was also delicate. Like, it just demanded incredible focus from people,
Yeah.
and incredible care. And
Yeah.
so, being the person who manages all of that, and who encourages that from other people,
Right.
I think that's like the biggest challenge. But it was really wonderful. Like,
Yeah.
people
Yeah. Yeah.
were
Yeah.
great,
Yeah, yeah, I noticed that as well. I definitely had, a very similar reaction to that. I noticed minute details,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, be it because of the orchestrations. Clancy did a fantastic job. We
Amazing.
definitely need to
Oh,
focus on that as well.
yes.
But the orchestrations were written in a way that would sort of highlight
Yeah.
whatever it took, you know,
Yes.
whatever was the necessary ingredients, whatever were the
Yeah.
necessary ingredients, they were highlighted. They were not only there to sort of be in the background, they were
Yeah.
there to make an entrance, to make, to be highlighted, to be
Yeah.
focused on,
Well, they were miraculous too because they did two things at once, which was they completely, what Clancy did was completely support the
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
like, and the characters and
yeah,
like their lives and their emotional lives.
yeah.
And on the flip side, it was like every book was like a showcase for a great musician. And
Mm,
it was a beautiful thing because, you got to, they were perfect orchestrations for the theater.
yeah.
And they also, you guys all got, moments to really
Step out.
shine. And also, it was pleasurable to play. Like
Yeah,
it was a show that just felt good
yeah, yeah,
to
yeah, yeah, yeah.
do every night.
Yeah, yeah, this that yeah, it definitely did. There was a very cathartic moment. There was I shouldn't say one cathartic moment. The entire show was the
Mhm.
cathartic moment from beginning
Mhm.
to end, you know. So that was definitely noticeable. It's the I always attributed that to no small amount to the story,
Yeah,
to the premise of the show. This, what happens when you live a lie,
yeah,
what happens, does it only influence you, does it grow, does it influence, the people around you? I
yeah,
thought that in and of itself was already so, um for lack of better description, honest,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That the minute the audience kind of understood where, oh, this is where it's coming from, this is where we are,
yeah.
oh, the parallels to their own lives were immediately,
Absolutely.
and that kind of made, i I know that me as a musician, I definitely felt that on stage, where all of a sudden the audience was like, the
Yeah,
senses are just
yeah,
heightened, and then I'm sitting there and, trying to do my best, and all of a sudden my senses are heightened because
yeah,
it plays off what's coming from the audience.
yeah.
So it was,
You guys were
this,
also a character in the drama. I mean, not only because we were on Broadway, because we were visible,
right.
but also because Janine's score, um, and Clancy fully, beautifully realizes this.
Mm,
Like does contain the idea of the lie and the truth. I mean, there's moments of of real, like, earnest purity of experience, like
right,
changing my major.
right,
The way that's composed, it's exactly what the character is feeling.
right.
But there's things like, telephone wire
Mm,
that are masking what the person's feeling. So
yeah,
it's like, the orchestra in Fun Home oftentimes was like playing, the sort of either the surface level
yeah,
and then the actors had to sort of be, sort of playing at what they were feeling underneath but not saying.
right.
Or sometimes I felt like, Janine, I mean, the use of like major and minor
Mm,
triads and spelling of triads and major and minor seconds, like throughout the score, even in the most sort of innocuous places,
right.
there's the band was also just playing the little dark shadows in these people,
Yeah,
or the
yeah, yeah.
little things that are like, wow, this is a beautiful song.
But
And then
there's
maybe
something
like an
else
eight,
going on,
there's
like,
this thing, and you're like,
yeah, yeah,
wait,
yeah,
what I'm hearing am I hearing something?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
you
yeah,
guys were providing
yeah,
a lot of the text, which
yeah.
was amazing.
Yeah, I thought that was just a fascinating use of sort of, I always call it 21st century harmony, because like in modern or post avant-garde or whatever,
Yeah,
I don't know what the typification is,
right.
but in modern classical music there is the introduction of dissonance,
Yeah,
that goes along with everything else. There's not only like everything in harmony and beautiful and
right.
spelled out and whatnot. No, there's also dissonance,
Yeah,
and how can we introduce dissonance into uh, a project, a melodic statement and
Yes.
make it say something,
Yeah.
and make the dissonance convey an emotion or memory or whatever it might be. So
Yeah.
I always thought that there was I thought that that was brilliantly used and brilliantly done by Tesori
Yeah.
to kind of introduce this element into her writing or into her output, so to speak.
Yeah.
um
There's also like you think about like the opening,
yeah,
English horn riff.
yeah,
It's like the spelling of a major triad and then a minor triad and then the
yeah,
major triad again. There's something like familial about that. Like these elements existing next to each other that are related but slightly different, and
yeah,
they,
yeah,
it's super discombobulating at the beginning of the show to hear that
yeah, yeah,
because again, like it's a perfectly tonal expression.
right,
It also contains like just enough harmonic language to
mm,
let you know what's going on in these people, and
right,
that is a thing that the band, on Broadway. I remember we all talked about making the choice for the character, the little girl, to come through the orchestra for her first entrance,
oh yeah,
and there
yeah,
was real we talked about it being like, if the orchestra is giving us this motivic harmonic information,
mm,
we want the character to come from that place, like
right,
walk right through that for us, so
mm,
we can see that they're connected, that there's a lot going on here.
right,
So I
right,
mean, something challenging for me as a music director is to make sure that I maintain the integrity of that. But
mm,
but also the challenge for you guys, as you're articulating, was that you were on stage having. I mean, it was a tremendously emotional show
oh
for
yeah,
people in the audience, surely, and also for a lot of us doing it.
oh
And
yeah,
so to be in that intense situation was amazing.
oh yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
also, you had a lot of heavy lifting to do
Yeah,
because
I
the
mean
score
that.
does a lot of work.
Yeah, that kind of came with the project, and
Yeah.
I thought that it totally the project validated the heavy lifting, so to speak.
Yes.
Like it's I got a lot of pushback from possible subs about is that really necessary, like all the
All
bases
the
and all the
bases. Yeah.
switching and all that. And I was like, well, yes, it
Yeah.
is,
Gotta
because
sound like it. Yeah.
we're trying to, like, we don't have a lot of time to establish
Mm.
a particular time period, a
Mm.
particular feeling.
Mm.
We don't have a lot of time to do that. The show in and of itself is 90 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's not as if we're going to come back to this song or this theme, even. Like, no,
Yeah.
we're going, and we're jumping, as you already noted, like, we're jumping in the timeline.
Yeah.
So we need to use all of our resources to tell the audience, listen, we're now in the 70s,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Dead center, like, this is what's
Yep.
happening. Bell bottoms and the Jackson 5 are on the radio.
Yeah.
um and then we're going through some drama inside and outside.
Yeah.
We have 10, 15, 20 seconds perhaps at the I mean, that's already a lot, right?
Yeah.
To explain that to the audience in musical terms, which often I always call us musicians manipulators of emotions or manipulators of memories, right?
Mm-hmm.
The minute you hear a song, you have an emotion, you have a memory to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I am now, with all these instruments, I am pushing the audience's buttons
Yeah.
very, very decidedly. Like, Brady Bunch has this sound.
Yep. Yep. You're
That's
cute.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, also, I mentioned my attention to detail being like, oh man, last night in the underscore, this word it was just slightly ahead of this note.
yeah,
Like, which didn't drive me crazy. It was a total joy.
right,
But also, there was a minimalism to some of the score.
yeah,
And in the orchestration, there was a chamber music quality to a lot of it
yeah,
that made, it's like me with what word my quarter note lands on, and you with what bass tone you need to put out
yeah,
to convey information.
yeah,
It matters a lot.
oh
Like
yeah,
it matters a lot,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
the stakes are high in that moment for like getting it exactly right. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I always felt like, how many bases do we need to use to get it right? It turns out that pushed it, as far as we could. But
Yeah, no, definitely. This, it's it. I was ready to bring in the synth bass. I
I
was
mean,
ready to.
yeah,
I was like, where can we use this?
God,
So that was, I was totally on board with that, and originally Clancy had written 4 basses into the score, right, and then I brought in the fretless, so that made it 5.
hmm
Um, and a lot of that also has to do with the difficulty of subbing and the piece being what it is, being so steeped in chamber music where all of a sudden every note is exposed. So as a bass player, you're already one of the extremes of whatever ensemble you're playing with, simply
yeah,
because of the range of that you're dealing with.
yeah,
But now on top of that, you have really good orchestrations and everything is exposed,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it was like very often the pushback was, well, is it really necessary? Because I am so exposed that if I'm a little off, it will be noticeable. Yet if I play it all on one instrument, you
yeah,
know even if I'm so exposed, I can be a little off and it might not be so noticeable. But
yeah,
c'est la vie. I don't I'll never regret playing all these instruments and figuring it out and
yeah.
and just getting the people in who wanted to do it anyway.
Yeah, and I think it was
So
important. I think it was worth it.
oh yeah, oh yeah,
It,
yeah, yeah,
it all in Fun Home. It all, those last 5 minutes of the show were
yeah,
just, incredibly powerful,
yeah,
and everything that everyone working on the show did for the previous 85 minutes
yeah,
made that possible. So I
yeah,
think every choice was like, okay, well, what does it need to be
right.
to really, to make this thing have the gravity and power that it needs to have by the end.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah. Most definitely. There
right,
was there was a very, very there was a very noticeable uh progression, I guess, or yeah, progression is the right word. That I don't want to say that it just climaxed at the end or whatever.
mhm,
This, yes, that sort of happened as well, but there was a progression that
yeah,
went through the entire show. And I thought that was brilliantly done by the creative team. Um, that they managed to keep the focus on that progression,
yeah,
right? And one thing kind of led
yeah,
into the next, and the following thing kind of needed the preceding thing for it
yes,
to really blossom or really open up or really make sense.
right.
So that was just a very, very specific to that particular show. The funny thing is, I'm looking over my notes here, and I wrote out all these notes, and we kind of covered them all.
Good. I mean, it's nice to talk to you about this show, George.
it's I have a little bit of a dilemma here.
Wow. Well, you know what? Fun Home was short.
Yeah, yeah,
We
that
covered all
is
the
true.
90 minutes. Here we are.
One thing I do want to ask you, and that is, how do you because we are talking about all these particular styles, genres,
Yeah.
all of that coming together in Fun Home.
hmm
Now, how do you hear these influences,
hmm
and what does that exactly, like, how do you hear them inside the show,
Yeah.
and what does that sort of mean to you? Like, how do you express these influences? I know I do it one way, phrasing wise,
Yeah.
instrument wise, and all that. Since you're a musician who comes from a different instrument and in the
Yeah.
ensemble has a different job, so to speak, your perspective is different to that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like my I'm thinking about like my growing up. Like,
Right,
when I was a kid in Minneapolis, I was it was in the 80s and 90s.
right,
So to me, like, I listened to so much, I listened to so many records,
yeah,
right? So like
yeah,
one half of me always feels rooted in like studio recording.
yeah,
It's like I'm constantly hearing, Stevie Wonder
yeah,
somewhere in my head.
yeah,
And then there's the part of me that grew up, and so I like being a fan of like great popular music,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah. And
and then
just to interrupt you real quick, I can attest to that because we did the
Oh my God.
We
Yeah.
did that show together.
Yeah. Um,
Getting my act together and
yeah.
or getting the band together and taking it on
I
the
mean,
road or whatever.
that show completely feeds into this question too. It's
Yeah,
like, so
yeah,
for me, it's like being a fan of that,
yeah.
and being a fan of the theater, like plays,
Right.
I feel like I've always felt like a bit of a synthesis. And I also love musicals,
Yeah,
but I do find myself constantly drawing on, being a fan of straight theater and being a fan of like albums.
yeah,
And so for me, when I, getting my act together, or the sort of pastiche stuff like the Jackson 5 stuff and Fun Home, or
yeah.
even the stuff that feels like Indigo Girls, or
Right,
whatever it is referencing, or whatever I hear it referencing,
right,
I really, the part of me that loves plays feels a little bit like I come at everything like an actor would come at it. So I'm always thinking of character.
yeah,
I'm always thinking of the psychology of these people.
right,
And then, I just have to really know inside out the sort of style
right,
of the genre we're doing.
right,
And so it's really about it, like, it's about knowing those things like as the tools in your tool belt.
right,
Like you do this, you go up a whole step, not a half step. You do,
right,
this phrasing would be this thing, this
right.
reverb would be on this, but not on that,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
sort of style stuff of
yeah,
the way a record would sound.
yeah.
And then like thinking about how these characters would hear that record. So like it's funny,
Mm.
like I would there were times when I would like feel Come to the Fun Home, the Jackson 5 song, a riff is
Mm-hmm.
like a good example of this, because occasionally in the run of the show I would feel like it was feeling like a little too comfortable, like,
Right,
and it wasn't necessarily a tempo thing, like we didn't do it hugely differently throughout the run,
right.
but it just like in feel, maybe it was like a little too fat, maybe it was a little too on the back end of the beat, like, and it was more what it would sound like on a record,
Right.
because then that part of me clicks in that says like, okay, well, the people singing it
Yeah.
are kids under the age of 10, so how do these kids hear
Right.
ABC,
Right.
and how do they perform it for themselves? And
Right.
it's going to have like a different energy,
Yeah.
but like we're still going to do it right, like it,
Yeah.
the orchestration was so good for that song.
Oh
And
yeah.
also like we did it like, a group of session players might do it, but it
Yeah.
had just this little bit of character that was more related to the kids
Right.
than it was to like, you know um than the original sort of way it would be recorded.
Right.
Makes
Right.
any
I
sense?
mean,
So I feel like it has to be authentic, and
yeah.
then I'm always, as a music director, thinking about characters and how they would be feeling it.
Right. Right. Of course. Of course. I mean, the kids singing it in the funeral home in
Yeah,
Pennsylvania are not the Jackson Five. You
exactly.
know, so
Yeah,
that difference right there is essential. That's
and that's
they
cool. And
and
they're going to get excitable, and yeah,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly, exactly. So they've been listening to the Jackson Five. And they perhaps see themselves in, I know from for a fact, like for many musicians who are just a generation older than we are,
mm,
saw the Jackson Five on
mhm,
TV, and they were like, I could see myself in them all of a sudden.
yeah,
I was maybe I wasn't Michael Jackson, but I was Tito, or I was
right,
Randy, or
yep,
whoever, right? I was
yep,
Jermaine.
mhm,
Um, so that was yeah, that was just the influence that that particular band had over young impressionable people,
yeah,
and that needed to be shown in the context of the show.
yeah,
It's not the same as as the Jackson 5
right.
singing the song
No,
in
you're
the
not
show,
replicating
not at
something.
all.
Yeah, yeah,
So that was pretty deep, and that's such a specific detail, that needed to be brought out. And I thought that actually we managed that many times over,
yeah.
because there were
Well,
many of those details.
yeah. And when we did I'm Getting My Act Together at Encores, it was a similar thing. Like it
Right.
wanted to be totally in the world of the 70s,
Oh
like
yeah.
a singer-songwriter thing.
The ARP, remember
Yeah, we
that?
had to know, the tropes
That's,
of that, like exactly what that was.
that was incredible. The minute you started playing that keyboard,
Oh
like
my God.
I heard every Elton John, every Kate Bush, every Bowie album,
I mean,
every
playing that keyboard was like one of the highlights of my life. I loved it. I mean, I'm sure you remember. I loved it so much.
Yeah, you did.
If I could steal it, I was like, this is the greatest. But then we also, we use that as a jumping off point and like,
Yeah.
did our thing with this music. But
Oh yeah.
for me, it really, you got to know your stuff
Yeah.
stylistically.
Yeah. This I always when it comes to the conversation about styles and all of that, I tend to tell people, we can academically kind of figure it out
Yeah,
and put it all together, but what it means to me is knowing the music
yeah,
and knowing the songs, right?
yeah.
And perhaps taking it a step further and knowing, reading the now they don't exist anymore album covers, but
Oh,
now we have Wikipedia, so we can figure stuff out otherwise, and I thought that was always so refreshing to work with you, that anytime I was coming in and I was like, I just heard this Aaron Neville album and it's blowing my mind, and you understood what I meant,
mm,
or Celia Cruz is amazing, you were like,
yeah,
yes, she is.
yeah.
It's like,
That's the fan part.
yeah, of course,
If
of
you're
course.
a fan,
Yeah.
it's a great thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
You'll never be
absolutely.
sad. You'll never stop learning or being interested in things because
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It never goes away. It never goes away. Well, listen, Chris. I don't want to keep you any longer. I'm so thankful and so grateful that you made yourself available today.
absolutely.
Um, this was a lot of fun. I think this is a a prime example of different perspectives
Mm,
on the same project,
mm,
and that is really, that's something that you don't necessarily get from media,
yeah,
instructional books
yeah,
or magazines or whatever. So that's one thing that I'm trying to convey here to the audience, that
great.
there's all these different perspectives that kind of make a project like this work out. And again, I'm so grateful that you were able and willing to share your perspective with me and with the audience. So
It's a
thank you
real
so much
pleasure.
for that.
Thank you, George.